Okay, now let's take a look at the various types of clouds. So we have a private cloud, that's basically where you manage and maintain all resources. So in a sense, you manage everything. You become the provider. So it could be a SaaS, IaaS, PaaS environment, and then we shift 180 degrees to the opposite direction. We have private cloud. So in this model, the private cloud provider manages the resources. Everything is hosted. You simply control the data. And then we have a hybrid where it's typically a mix of public and private. Resources are typically created internal, private, and then scaled elastically to the cloud as needed. That's a typical way to do it, and it's not the only way, but that's typically how hybrid cloud would be used. And then we have the community version, which you may or may not see. That's basically where the resources are shared among the several groups, companies, and organizations. It can be public, private, but costs are spread across various members. So again, kind of a co-op arrangement if you would like to go that way. So to make sure that you understand the concepts and various concepts, let's talk about X as a service, right? It's a bit of a buzzword, so you can insert the buzzword as service. It could be anything. So it could be anything that you would typically provide either to yourself or to customers. If you automate that and turn it into a service, then it becomes X as a service. Now it really boils down around virtualization and commoditization of almost every layer of the IT stack. It could be networking, storage, compute, database, etc., etc. But what it really does is provide for a quicker deployment along with increased high availability or HAs to say, and disaster recovery or DR. And as I mentioned, infrastructure as a service, IaaS, allows for distribution and consumption of resources as a service, as the same name implies. Multiple users can utilize the same infrastructure. So if you have multiple customers utilizing the same gear, that's referred to as multi-tenant. Just like an apartment building has multiple people living in that building, they're using that facility, it's a multi-tenant facility. Same concept here when we're talking about the infrastructure as a service. We have a bunch of servers that aren't being used simply by one person or one group. We could have multiple groups, and that could be internal or external to the company. And what that does is it allows for elastic scaling as needs and demands increase or decrease. It's typically priced at a utility model, and what that does is shifts the company's spends from CapEx to OpEx. In other words, instead of having to buy everything upfront, they buy just as much as needed, and then they only pay for what they use. Then they have a recurring billing after month versus CapEx, where you might buy it once and then you would depreciate the access of the asset over X number of years, typically 5. But if you're doing from an OpEx model, this really is no end to it. You just pay for what you use. Its consumption is based like on the utility would be, and it just gives for the life of the project or the life of that piece of infrastructure. So again, this can also be public or private depending upon how your company structures things. As you can see here, it's made up of different things like CPU, storage, interconnect, or networking. All of these things are kind of bundled together and given to the customer. So they don't have to worry about doing any of that stuff. They simply deploy their servers in their infrastructure, whether it's manual or automated. If they need more, they'll scale up again. Could be manual, could be automated, and when they are done using that or don't need that additional resource or resources, they can scale back down, tear those things down back to their bare minimum, so you're only paying for what you need. IaaS also lends itself to automation, so it leverages automation and self-service, which enables a customer to select their own hardware and software configurations and provisions their own infrastructure. So here we have a user as an example. They would log into a self-service portal, and from there they would choose their configuration. All right, so that could typically be a small configuration. As an example, it could be one server with one CPU, a certain amount of RAM, and a certain amount of storage. Or they might need a medium size, could be larger, beefier server with additional CPU, additional RAM, and storage. It could be like a larger server, right? We're kind of doing t-shirt sizes here, so to speak, small, medium, and large. A large server would have even more compute, even more storage, and RAM, etc., etc. So it allows them to kind of choose between different sizes as they need. And if they need additional resources, they can be scaled up, as I mentioned, and torn back down when they aren't needed. Next, kind of going up the stack a bit, we have platform as a service. So PaaS environment is comprised of computational resources. It could be test and dev environments, and these things can be easily be created unconfigured. So the benefits are really, there is really no need to order and acquire hardware and associated infrastructure. Test environments can be quickly created, expanded as needed. We can run tests, we can run reports on those things, and then tear those things back down on demand. And again, multi-tenant where many users can use the same resources. So the benefit really is sped up to the market. There is no need, as I mentioned, to acquire the rack stack, configure hardware, configure network, obtain IP addresses, load balancers, virtual local area networks or VLANs, install software, configure, and so on and so forth, right? There's no need for that. The list continues. So all of these things are taken care of ahead of time or by the provider, allowing the actual customer and the developers to really focus on what they need to do. So as an example, platform as a service or PaaS providers would be AWS Elastic, Beanstalk, Microsoft Azure Application Service, and I'll just kind of go through the rest over here. I'm not going to go through each one individually, but you get the idea. There are a number of different scale kind of hyperscalers as referred to organizations out there that provide all of these services to customers. And then they're multi-tenant as well. You can have potentially hundreds of customers on the same hardware, which allows for our economy to scale and allows the customers to pay, as I mentioned, only for what they consume. Scale up as needed, tear back down when they're done. Moving one level further up the stack, we have software as a service. So a SaaS offering or a software as a service is basically an application that's provided on demand. So here, there's no setup, no installation, no configuration required, nothing. Everything is taken care by the SaaS provider. All you need to do is consume that application. So example might be Salesforce, ServiceNow, Office 365, Google Apps, and so forth. Just understand the distinction between these different groups and how they play their role into your overall